words to the?
Oh, I think everybody knows what they're in for in this crowd, so.
All right. Well, then I will talk about the latest sort of things that's happening here in the Midwest that, of course, has happened on the coast for some time. It has to do with catalytic converters that, for those that don't know, it's a part of your car, it's part of the exhaust. If I read Wikipedia, it would tell me exactly what it is, but basically helps make things cleaner. And the thing is that they, in this piece of exhaust, it has a bunch of precious metals in it. And at different times, those precious metals are different prices on the market. So sometimes these metals, when they're cheap, doesn't really matter. Nobody really cares about catalytic converters that much. But right now, the metals are quite expensive on the aftermarket, and the Prius catalytic converters happen to have an awful lot of these metals in them. And so there's been a bunch of thefts. I'll show a little news story if I can use this Zoom thing correctly. But first I'll show you what one looks like, because everyone just has, exhaust parts sitting around their house. So let's see, how far back do I have to get? This is what's on the Prius. It actually has two, which makes it even more sought after. In the past, they could be worth maybe a couple $100 to sometimes like $1,000. And so what thieves are doing are just going in and cutting them off. So I'm gonna see if I can make this video go really quick. I think. Share screen. I'm getting there. And come on. Here it is. Hopefully this works.
Getting away with catalytic converters from cars in the Milwaukee area. Similar reports are popping up across the country. Mary Jo Ola tells us the specific car is being targeted.
Milwaukee police have had several calls for stolen catalytic converters from the downtown area. They say thieves are targeting older Toyota Priuses. We met one victim who's trying to warn others. You can't see them, but Igli Katsa says his dash cam caught the sound of crooks sawing off the catalytic converter on his Prius.
So this is the only part they needed, and they did it in like less than 2 minutes.
It happened while his car was parked in a garage near 6th and Highland Wednesday morning.
Most definitely they were skilled. They got beautiful fresh cuts. They knew what saw blades to use to get in and out of there quickly as they can.
This affects my job, this affects my school, this affects my family.
The MATC student uses his car for work, taking people to appointments. Now he may be out at least $1,500.
I'm trying to fix it, but is it going to happen again?
Milwaukee police did not disclose how many cases they're working, but Igli says officers told him it's in the dozens. Andrew Toyota on Silver Spring says at least 8 victims showed up to their shop. That's within the last month.
And when they get in here, it sounds like you're at a NASCAR race. It's that loud.
Many of them have no idea.
We get the cars inside, we put them up in the air, and we find out the catalytic converters are cut off the cars.
Car experts say catalytic converters and hybrids are lucrative. Just one can resell for hundreds of dollars. They say it's on salvage yards to help deter these crimes. Mary Jo Ola, today's TMJ4.
Thieves are getting away with cars.
So hopefully you heard some of that story. I hope. So basically they go in, jack up the car, cut it off in, again, a couple minutes or less. And they're worth so much money that sometimes they even just leave the jack behind, which is fascinating. And we've seen here locally that like last month there was a couple dozen just in the neighborhood around Madison in general. And the call usually is someone calls me up, hey, I see some weird things underneath my car, some springs and a bunch of parts, and my car's really loud. And then I tell them the bad news. So a brand new one from Toyota retails about $2,100 just for the catalytic converter when it gets cut off, which sucks for that person. Here we have the option of putting on aftermarket ones that it's only a few $100s to put on. So it's good for people who have already gotten them stolen. If you want to protect it, you can get this plate. Hopefully I can show this. Basically, it's a big piece of metal that we put underneath it to at least hinder them. If the thieves see that, they're like, "Ah, this has got that on it. We don't want to deal with it." They still could theoretically cut through it if they wanted to, but they'll usually just move on to another. There's plenty of other Priuses in Madison. So I had a guy who called me. He had his Prius catalytic converter stolen. He went to the dealer, got a new one put on. I told him, like, you should immediately come over here and get a protective plate on it, because the thieves will come back again a second time. And once they see, they know that you've got the Toyota catalytic converter on there, they know you're an easy target. So the other options I tell people, well, rather than putting on the Toyota one, once you come here, we'll put on an aftermarket one. It doesn't have as many metals in it. The thieves don't want it. So that's a second option. But right now the market is so much for these catalytic converters. People could actually come to me and they could have two choices if they have a stock catalytic converter. Either we can put a plate on it to protect it. And again, that's a few $100s to do that. That takes about an hour. Or realistically, if I wanted to, I could start offering a service where, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll take your Toyota catalytic converter. I'll take that off, and for free, I will put on a new catalytic converter. And I'll give you a $200 bounty. And even then, that would be, it's still, I can still make as much money as doing the other job, because the market's so high for them, at least for right now. So, but if you know anyone who has a Prius, they should definitely do something to protect it, either up your insurance so it gets it covered, put a plate on it, or take it off and put an aftermarket one on it. Because,
Eric, all Prius or just older ones?
So it's Gen 2 Prius, 2004 to 2009 for sure. And the 2001 to 2003 are actually even more sought after, although they're not around as much. Those are even worth even more than the other ones. So it's any of the first two versions of the Priuses.
And you were saying they're like $1,500.
So the early ones are about $1,200 for them. So if I see a crappy beat up one with no, it's in an accident, whatever, if it has a catalytic converter, it's worth buying just for that. Again, that's today, but that market has changed, because if you tried to stockpile a bunch now, hoping it's going up, you could just as easily get stuck with a few $100, down the road. But it's a real thing. And like I said, the new ones from Toyota, not only are they $2,100 just for the part. I think the guy paid $3,000 just last week when he got his done. Now they're back ordered months, because big cities, this is a real big problem, and so they can be back ordered for a long time.
Anybody got any questions for Mr. Eric?
What did they change to make them less valuable but still as effective with the newer versions?
I think they're able to use less metals and make it still work properly, is what it is. That's my understanding of it, at least. But
yeah, I'd have to go back and look at I don't know when the emissions, so every like 5 years, the emissions pattern shifts where it become more and more stringent. And so every model year car that has to meet the latest emissions always they'll throw money at the problem to solve it for that year. So they'll like lose money selling the car just to maintain continuity. And then the next year and subsequent year cars, they'll tune back the emissions stuff and they'll save money on it later on to then pay back what they had to spend to get the first year car to work, if that makes any sense. So essentially, the first time the emissions gets really stringent again, like the next round of regulation, the cars have to be built even better, and oftentimes the manufacturer won't quite meet the emissions requirements without just throwing money at the problem. So they'll throw money at the problem, solve it, and then they'll become better in the future in the next year's cars, and then they'll tune back what they needed to throw money at to figure it out again, and then then the cars get cheaper again. So it's kind of ebbs and flows. Volkswagen rather famously has gotten caught going the other way, which is throwing a cheat at it rather than actually solving the problem. But when I was in college doing engine research, we went to go borrow a brand new Jetta Volkswagen because they were meeting emissions that we were working on in the lab, which it turns out now in hindsight, they really weren't meeting emissions that were in the lab, but we thought they were because they had all this crazy stuff on the car. So it's pretty wild. Anyway, any other questions for anybody?
Yeah, so if one was looking to get into the catalytic converter thieving business, like what kind of saw do I need and what salvage yard do I take them to?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I mean, again, you just really anything from the most basic tools, the cheapest jack, you just get a Sawzall with just a metal blade and cut them off, and they're cheap. I mean, it's really crazy. And, you know, I don't really understand where, you know, how this all happens because nobody's checking on it, right? Like, where did you get that from? And give us the VIN or whatever. But a lot of my other guys swear it's a mafia thing just because it's so widespread and it's really crazy. But
are current gen Priuses being affected or other cars, or is it really just the Gen 2 and older?
Yeah, the Gen 2 and older are the ones that are really being affected. Now, theoretically, thieves can steal any catalytic converter and get some money, you know, $50 for it, but they may not necessarily want to do it for 50 when they can just go do this for, you know, 500, 800, whatever, 1,000. And again, Prius, the other thing is Prius are pretty easy for people to identify as well, right? So that doesn't help.
It's amazing how that the thievery market gets so well focused. A few years back, there was some sort of Honda Civic headlight that was super popular, and so they were disappearing all over the place.
For years, it was the front plate on my car. I had a 1989 Volvo 240 DL, and the front plate, like the little insignia, you know, with the little like the Volvo, it was stolen for every car in my neighborhood.
Oh, geez. Yeah, but it's definitely a thing, and I don't think it's really going to go away unless those prices go down again. But even then, even if they go down to 300, there's still somewhere somebody who will want to do it or something for that.
Yeah, and like the news said, it's really a matter of catching whoever's fencing them. Like, not the actual thieves. You're not going to be able to stop the thieves from doing it, but you got to figure out how it's getting marketed back up, either as a used Prius catalytic converter somebody's buying, or where a salvage yard is taking it in, you know, and then they're reselling it. At some level, somebody in the middle is moving a lot of them because you got to be moving hundreds of them or more to, you know, make such a big impact on them. So it's such a weird thing.
It is funny to see when they realize partway through, sometimes they'll cut the wrong part. There's actually another part behind here, the resonator, that sometimes people cut off and take off with. They don't realize what they're stealing, and that's worth nothing. But I'm sure, you know, they got their knuckles wrapped later and learn it. But even with these, when I go put the plates on them, they even have stickers to put on the car to like try to identify that, hey, I really don't have a good catalytic converter on here. I've got a protection on here, whatever. So.
Yeah, and that's the other problem too, Dennis, is you know, people will be scooting under your Tesla looking for the extra fancy Tesla catalytic converter, not understanding that that's not a thing on a non.
All I know is after you guys built that Power Racer car, my Volt never went quite as fast as it used to. But that's why I don't bring the Tesla over to the shop anymore, you know.
Well, we could wrap some parts off that. I will never forget our old landlord bought like a brand new Tesla and brought it over to the shop, and he was an investor, and so he didn't know anything at all about the car. He just knew he wanted one. This was when they were really, really, really new, So he drove this car over, and like everybody rolls out of the shop to go check out this amazing, cool, new, brand new electric car. It's all fancy. And he just didn't know anything about it. I had an electric car and it's cool, and I knew it was the right thing I wanted to buy, but I don't know anything at all about any of it.
I like carrying around an 18650 battery, and then I tell people there's like 7,000 of them under the car. Their eyes get real big.
You're going to get the vapors after you. That's who's going to be getting a crowbar to your Tesla.
Yeah,
The old 18650s. Be out and need a nicotine fix. All right, we're substantially derailed now. Let's see. Do we want to watch Jim figure out? Jim, you got your tech all working? Well, I muted you, so now.
Question. How about now?
There we go. But you're Captain Echo over there. Yeah, now you're good.
Yeah?
All right, take it away, buddy.
All right. So I'm going to try to do a presentation on presentation stands. So UW was looking for, I don't know how they asked Lennon. Anyways, they were looking for stands for, I'm guessing, TAs and professors to do presentations, assuming that distance learning will be a requirement at some point in the semester. It's almost like colleges are failing at their on-campus stuff. Anyway, so they're preparing to do that. So he came with a design he had already mocked up, a prototype in MDF, and then was asking if we could make them. And then looking at it, it seemed like it seemed like it left a lot of room for improvement. So we took a stab at it. I modified it completely to use polycarb, because we had a bunch of polycarb, and I think it's just a better material for what he was going to do. So the general idea behind the stand is I'm going to switch to my other view. How do I make that full screen if I'm not talking into it? This is risky. Can you hear me now? Am I full?
I can still hear you.
Screen now? All right. Is this camera showing up on everybody's own?
Yeah, if you use grid view, you can see it. I see a cutting mat.
If you want the cutting mat to be big, you can go, each of you individually can go to the upper right corner of that and go to pin video, and that'll make the thing that Jim is trying to show us your main thing that you can see.
Zoom pro tip, thank you.
Awesome. I'll wait a second while everyone does that and scrolls through their things. All right. We're all good? So this is a picture of it with the plastic material on it. And basically it is a self-supporting stand. It's got adjustable height. And you will put a camera on it, or two cameras, one camera to view the presenter, and then one to look down at the subject that they wanted to be able to put on the a display down here, for instance. So that's the general idea. It's made out of 3mm polycarb and routed out on our Stinger right now, and we'll probably try some on the other one. So UW is going to use these. We'll find out hopefully that they work well for them or not. And that's the presentation stand. And now I'm going to try to do a presentation using the presentation stand of another project that also used polycarb. So I'm going to take the phone and hopefully put it on the presentation stand. Everyone should see a green mat with a grid on it. All right. Yay. So the general idea, I guess, is presenters want to do like old school and like put paper down and draw on it and things. So that's what I'm going to try to mock up, is what I guess what a presenter would do. The other view would be a camera, which would be staring at them in the face with their view for a Zoom meeting. So the presentation is going to be briefly about another project we did. Chris was helping a blind machinist gentleman to make a talking DRO. And this is just a box for the DRO. So it's holding a tablet, is running the software that runs the DRO. And then they wanted an overlay on the tablet which restricted his ability to press buttons to just the areas on the screen, the touch screen, that were relevant to the DRO. And then it will talk back to you. So I'm going to touch it and let's see if everyone can hear it. So the general idea is he's got a So he's got the tablet obviously can do lots of things. So he needs to be able to take the overlay off and do things like launch the app and other things, turn it on, turn it off. But when he has the app running, he can just drop this in, and it will give him a indication of where he wants to touch for specific things to the DRO. And then the general idea is this is talking to a set of glass scales on his mill, and he can tell where he's working. Now, he hasn't tried this yet, so we will, I guess, find out if it will actually work the way he's expecting it to. I have trouble, as a sighted person, even imagining what it would be like to be blind and working on something that could tear my arm off if I reached in the wrong place. But apparently there are a fair number of blind machinists out there, and this is what they use to work on the mills and lathes without being able to see or being visually impaired. So that was the other project. So last I just want to talk, because we've got a little time, about how this was built. And both of these projects gave me an opportunity to work a little bit more on something that I had done, but it wasn't really happy with, which was hook and hook joints for putting materials together. So here's a picture of one. I hope everyone can see it using my display. So the general idea is you'll have a slot, and you'll have a matching hook to it. The hook goes in the slot, and then you slyly engage, and that joins your two materials. And these can be a little bit problematic, which is why I didn't use them a lot. Mainly because they're either loose or very sensitive to the thickness of the material. And when I was doing parts mostly in acrylic, they're also fragile. Now, having switched to polycarb, which has the advantage that they're almost indestructible, the fragility wasn't a problem, but there still were some issues with how to make a joint that was satisfactory for building things using this technique. First of all, there's some issues when you route rather than laser cut. You don't have a very fine laser beam anymore, so you have to take into account the diameter of the cutter you're using to make it. So in order to make the inside joints like this, you need to dog bone, basically what it's called. But basically you overcut in the directions you are allowed to account for the cutter diameter, which in this case, here's me using my pen in the drawing. The cutter would go into these little divots. In this case, I'm using a 1.5 millimeter cutter. And this joint here is about 3 millimeters for 3 millimeter material. And so we're talking fairly small things here. So essentially the cutter's got to come in, route this out, and still give you reference surfaces in order for the joint to work. And the problems, of course, get to if your material isn't of a consistent thickness, which sheet material rarely is, your connection winds up being sloppy or loose. The cure for that, which I had an opportunity to do this time and had an incentive to coat it, was to taper this slot down and also taper it in here so that the material as it's sliding in is actually forced to bend very slightly, and that takes up any slack in the material or gap, but yet still allows it to function well. So I was pretty happy with that. The other issue with these hook joints is they aren't secure. In other words, they can slide back out, right? There's nothing physically engaging them. To take care of that, I added a little raised section in proximity to it, and then added an extra slot in proximity to it. So this allows basically a joint that goes together and then clicks into place and then is reversibly, so it can be undone, but actually holds the hook joint securely. So those are the two fun things I got to work on or the motivation to do with these two projects. So with that, that's the end of the presentation stand presentation.
Jim, that was really cool. You know, when touchscreens happened, I thought, oh, this is terrible for blind. And maybe in early versions it was. But at some point in time in the iPhone, they added this cool blind navigation thing where there's actually like a focus rectangle over icons and other things. And by swiping, you can change where it's focused. And then each thing has a name and it says what it is as you move around. And if they double tap, they are clicking on it. And I found some videos online of watching a sight impaired person use this navigation on an iPhone. And it was amazing. Like they're not quite as fast as a sighted person, but they could really get around. And I wonder if if Android has something like that, if this DRO software would support it. It does require a little bit of support on the application developer point of view. They either have to use standard controls, or if they implement their own, GUI controls, they have to use some accessibility APIs in order to publish what the control is and how it works and things like that. But most apps that use the standard controls all get this for free. And so sight impaired users can actually get around an iPhone remarkably well.
So this has got something really similar, but actually it's missing a key feature you're talking about. So the way that this DRO software, or the Android accessibility mode works, is you single tap anything and it'll announce whatever you're on. And then you would then double tap afterwards. Then you double tap afterwards and then it would actually select it.
Oh, so this is already running accessible mode. The voice we're hearing is not the DRO. It's actually
That's right. Unfortunately, it's not the DRO, because if it were the DRO would be smarter about how it implemented it. So right now it reads the full digit. So if you're like trying to place something to the thousandth, it's really annoying. And then the other annoyance is it follows up with this audio cue. And I don't know, maybe we can turn that off, the follow-up cue that tells you, oh, you touched this thing, but if you'd like to, you should double tap it, and then it'll do the thing that you wanted it to do. So I'm betting we can turn that off someplace. But what is interesting is what you brought up is way better, and that you can slide your finger around. This, like, you have to definitively tap a spot, and then it'll tell you what you're on. But if you like move your finger around, it's not smart. So it's kind of got this like delay in it, which I could see being really annoying. It'd be nice if it were a little bit faster. So
well, that's really cool. The other thing I learned watching these videos is they can speed up the audio to like incredibly fast rates, and they're so used to what it sounds like and so tuned into it that to the rest of us it just sounds like gibberish, but they can navigate around a lot faster. But I think ultimately the solution is we'll all have Neuralinks, right?
So the guy that we're building this for has relatively recently lost his sight in the last couple of years. So he's been a sighted person his whole life, but then like 5 years ago, he came here for an Arduino class, knowing that he was going to lose his sight, and he was interested in electronics, and so he wanted to learn a little bit about it while he still had a chance, because once he lost his sight, he wasn't going to be able to pick up new things as readily. So it's kind of interesting to meet him a long time ago, because he was in a different position that he's in now. So anyway, this is the last piece of getting this DRO. So now it's got to go back to him. I think he's going to recruit a friend or his wife to install the scales on his mill, and then he'll be able to set it up and go from there. But they were sharing a story when they were here dropping off some parts that I thought was really funny. They said that they met another machinist in Illinois who was blind and had been blind for a long time, and his wife was telling a story, and he said, yeah, she said, well, we rolled up and talked to this gentleman, and I kind of was surprised because he was blind but then missing like half of his fingers. And I thought, well, maybe being a blind machinist isn't really the best thing, because this doesn't seem to be a good start, with my husband trying to become a machinist being blind. And so they got to talking to the guy, and the guy, she said, all of a sudden stopped the conversation, said, oh, I should probably tell you what happened. So I was working on a blasting cap, and the blasting cap blew up in my hand. And so I lost my fingers and also my sight. But it was just funny in context, because he said he's never been hurt machining, but everybody always assumes that he's been hurt machining because he's well known as a machinist. So they got a kick out of that. So just like anything, your worldview gets adjusted to what opportunities you're given. And so obviously he takes advantage of that fun bit of the part of his story. But obviously it's unfortunate all around, but what is nice is trying to help with something like this. This is just a project that I'll document, we'll put online. I know Shira had worked on a talking caliper quite a few years back, and there's still people kind of playing with that too. So
I'm actually opening the project again, partly because I needed an example to lead some of the students through like the process of design for this senior design project. So we've actually reopened it, and we're probably going to get the circuit board made this semester. Kind of just walking students through an abstract process.
Well, if you'd like to convince your students to play around this Touch DRO system that we're using, which the person who gave me these parts to put together, but the trouble is the guy who released it, there's an open source version of it that runs on Arduino, And then there's a closed source version that we have the binaries for that runs on I think it's the microchip platform. I thought I had it sitting next to me, but I don't. At any rate, but the issue is that his Android software is closed source. So this Android app, literally with like a couple lines of change, you could make it so you could select how many digits it reads and then whether it continuously reads. Because you have to consider, in order for him to use this, he's going to have to touch the screen, have it read out the position, and then he's going to have to move the table a little bit and then touch the screen again, move the table, touch the screen, move the table, touch the screen. And if you're after a number like buried in the thousands, you're going to be tapping the screen, listening, tapping the screen, listening, tapping. It's just going to suck. So the ability to have the app either continuously read as you're approaching, or the app is supposed to have a feature that as you touch 0, it beeps to tell you, like, so then you could just crank the table if you're trying to go to 0, and then it would beep when you got to a value. So he showed me a video of a friend of his that has a different digital readout system that also looks very hand-built, that somebody's interfacing a Newall scale set, and it's got a set of 5 switches, and you switch on whatever switches you want it to read for the digit level. So if you're only interested in the, the tens digit or the ones digit, you could just flip one switch up. It'll just announce every time the 1 inch changes rather than every thousandth of an inch. And you can then adjust the switches to change what it's reading aloud. So I think there's some simple things that could be done to improve it. And the code base is there. It's just that the code system that's implemented isn't available anymore, but where he started still is, and that's still maintained by a few people. So it's just for everybody who's sighted, they don't need any changes because the system works. It's only for some of this accessible features that are making it harder. So, and there are blind machinists, but not more than, in the dozens or hundreds. That's one of the challenges and why you don't see a lot of innovation on a lot of the accessibility systems, just because there's not enough people kind of pushing it along and trying to help folks. So anyway, I'm off my soapbox. Anybody other questions for Jim?
It seems like an opportunity for some audio cues too, instead of speech, like a different tick for 1s versus 5s versus 10s, using bleeps and ticks and things like that. And then also voice input to it to control it rather than touches.
Or a tone frequency, depending on how close you are to your target.
Yeah, only if you're pitch perfect though, right?
Well, relative pitch. No, you don't have to be pitch perfect.
So is this DRO being added to a manual mill?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, because there's a lot of the CNC mills have the pendant on them that has distinct clicks for thousandths, and then you can set it to different values. But I guess if the machine doesn't have the motors in it initially, that wouldn't really help.
Yeah, and I had thought about, would we be better off starting with a CNC machine and using the servos as the encoders and then working from a table, but most of the CNC machines have the hand wheels pulled off. So it's kind of a horse apiece in terms of which system's better to start with. And in this case, we're sort of constrained on what he's got as opposed to what we'd implement ideally, given an open set. The other reality is if he had learned machining early on and was a competent CNC machinist, I could see a lot of value there in being able to run the thing off the computer rather than really having to interact with much at all. But that unleashes a whole nother ballgame, because usually looking at G-code, you're looking at a visualization of it. And so now I can't even imagine how you'd render in your head what the G-code's spouting out. And one of the other interesting things, if you meet somebody who's blind, you run into varying levels. You talk about audio cues and stuff like that. There's a person I knew in college who had amazing hearing because he's been blind since birth. But somebody who's just recently lost their sight doesn't have that capability yet, any more than any of the rest of us do. So it's just like anything, that sense has to be adapted and improved. So I think with practice he'll get there, but today he's not really going to benefit too much from either ultra rapid audio or other things where he's still learning how to hear those things. So but yeah, the person who was blind from birth, their text reader on their phone was insane. You couldn't hear anything. You couldn't even hear. It's like the fastest auctioneer voice ever, but just crazy how blazingly fast he could get through words, and he'd understand all of it. It didn't make any sense at all, which is pretty cool. Different skills. All right, Nick, did you want to share a couple things? You had quite a list, so I might cut you off at some point. Fair warning.
Yeah, it's all little stuff, but basically since COVID started. I've got 7-day weekends, so I have time to tinker with stuff. First thing is, I made a presentation. Okay, here's all the stuff I'm going to talk about. I'm going to skip the stuff about our bike camping adventure. But first thing, if you've got a Mac charger and you've had it for very long, you'll notice that from bending the cord at the ends, it'll break, the wires will get exposed, and then they'll break and it'll stop working. Chris found an old charger that nobody else wanted. It was in perfectly good condition. Before he would give it to me, he wanted me to show him how I was going to prevent that. And he suggested using Sugru, and I like using things that I have around. So I had some 1/2-inch heat shrink tubing, and I had seen this on the internet. You can take this 1/2-inch tubing, which doesn't come close to fitting over the plug, but you can stretch it. And I happen to have a pair of needle nose pliers that turned out to be just perfect for this. So I'd compress them together, put the snoot in here, and stretch it. So here is one that's been stretched before. This is 1/2-inch wide. This is about 3/4 inch wide, just a little over 3/4. And now this will slide over the end, and you just hit it with a heat gun, and it ends up looking like the second picture in the right-hand column. So the reinforcement between this thick part of the plug and this thin part of the cord isn't as likely to break. You can get different colors, like it shows in the picture here. Now, that's what you want to do when the charger is new. If you've had the thing for a while and you didn't do that, your cord may come off, and you may be kind of if it comes off at the end on the transformer, then you're kind of stuck. You have to go out and buy a $5 replacement cord, crack this case open, which is glued with really good glue, and you have to use a razor to cut it apart. And when you put it back together, it'll look pretty ghetto. So I try to avoid ever doing that. Unfortunately, none of my chargers have broken at this end. They always break at this end. So I've done that patch on that end. Some of them are so far gone that oh, here, see what I was going to show. Some of them are so far gone that the wires don't make contact anymore, and then the easy thing to do is to just go buy one of those replacement cords and splice it in, because you've got 5 pins on the end of this thing, but there's really only 2 power wires going in there. So it's an easy thing to splice together, and these pictures down here on the right-hand side show you that. Let me get this full screen. The brilliant thing that they do now, that they should have done all along, is that they make the, it's not showing up on here, it's on the right-hand side. On my screen, your pictures are all over the top of it. They make the box with a jack into it instead of having the plug hardwired. And so you can buy a wire that's got USB-C on one end, which is what comes out of the transformers now, and goes to your T connector. Yeah, that's it. Any questions on that? Okay, is this stuff everybody already knows? I'm the only one in the world who's never had to deal with this before.
No, I've actually done it myself. On my work computer, I had the same charger. And I think if you were patient, you could probably go into, not business, but you could probably make some good side money if you just sold pre-stretched heat shrink on eBay.
Actually, somebody's doing that.
Oh. Not surprised.
But I didn't buy it because you still, it didn't save anything. And I like using stuff that I have around. This is, the yellow stuff is stuff I got at Sector back when we used to be able to go there. And the black stuff that I have comes in this selection pack from Harbor Freight. Harbor Freight, I only buy things there that have no moving parts. So I'm okay buying heat shrink tubing from them. Anything else I think is hazard fraud, which is what most people call it.
The jack stands I leave behind when I cut off catalytic converters I got at Harbor Freight.
You know, all you gotta do is haul those in. They'll give you new ones now. It's just whether the new ones will get recalled again.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay.
The interesting thing about those MagSafe connectors, the LED in there is not driven from the transformer, but actually from the computer. And so there are times where the computer's charging, but the LED's off just because that pin is dirty or something like that.
Oh, okay. That's what those extra pins are for. They come out of the computer.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I'll move on to the next thing. Electric mower last night, or Sunday night, Sunday afternoon, we were biking over to a friend's house for a drive-by housewarming party. And when we went by the co-op, I saw this mower that you see there on the right. And I happened to know from looking into battery replacements for our mower that it uses exactly the same battery. And so, you know, we went by it at 4 in the afternoon. I decided, well, you know, if it's still there tonight, I'll go out for a walk. It's about 1.5 miles from my house. So we got home that night. It was just about time to lock all the doors, and I remembered it. And I'll walk down there. If it's not there, I get a good walk. If it is there, then that's an omen that I should probably take it home and fix it. And it was still there, so I pushed it home. Everybody was, there weren't that many people out, and I don't really care what people think. Anyway, I guess maybe I don't have to tell you that. I look like someone who doesn't care how I look. So I pushed it home, and I took, the reason it looked really attractive to me was because the battery can come right out of it. And we have a small house with no garage. And in the winter, I've been having to bring our whole mower down into the basement so that it isn't out in the freezing cold, and so it'll last longer. But with this one, I can leave the mower base out in the shed, just bring the battery into the house and stick it under the stairs and out of the way. So sure enough, I took the battery case apart. It had exactly the same cells. And I also learned something else interesting. It's got these little plastic subframes in it because this case was originally made to take three 14 amp hour cells. And so at some point they made the whole thing cheaper by downsizing the cells. Anyway, I took the top off of our other mower, which was easy to do. Just take 6 screws out. It had the exact same 3 batteries in the exact same configuration. I swapped them, and this mower started working right away, and my mower stopped. So I looked online. The batteries, the replacement batteries, the 12 volt, 10 amp hour cells, of which there are 3 to make it 36 volts, cost $20 each. So now we're looking at, you know, what option do we want to do? Cheapest thing is just to replace the 1 bad battery in the 3 in the newer mower, and we'll have 3 that are as good as new. Or what we might do is just order 4 brand new batteries. So the one mower's got 3 brand new batteries, the other mower's got 3 good as new batteries, and we can sell one of them. And I might look into replacing them with lithium, but we have such a small yard. This is such a small stakes thing that $20 sounds like a good price to do this. Any questions on that?
I heard if you get after one of those Tesla cars, they got a whole bunch of those little batteries in the bottom of them. You can just peel them right out of the bottom.
I have a few of them here myself. Yeah, I'm not really looking to do that. I did find that I could find scooter packs 2 of those for $150. The mower cost $400 new 12 years ago, or 8 years ago in 2012. So we're not really looking to spend a lot of money. And I don't think, from our conversation before the meeting, it doesn't sound like a used electric mower is going to sell for much, even with new batteries.
It's hard to tell. I mean, you wait till spring next year, definitely. Right now is less likely people are looking for anything.
Yeah, did I mention we don't have a lot of room to store things? Yeah, I'll move on to the next thing. So we were planning on a camping trip a couple of weekends ago, and Jane has never been bike camping, and I went on a week and a half trip to the Keweenaw with some friends. They did all the cooking, they had all the cooking gear, and so I had to get set up with something. And I thought, well, you know, I'd seen these tin can wood gas stoves, and so I thought I'd see if they're really as easy to make as they say. And they are. This took me about a half an hour to make. We'd made chili the night before, and so I had a tomato sauce can here and a couple of bean cans. I used a can opener to cut the vent openings in here. The inside can has those same vent openings plus holes drilled in the bottom, just with I have a drill press, but you can just use a hand drill. And then something I hadn't seen on any of them, I added a bolt in the center to hold the burner chamber can in there. And the tomato sauce can, to make this sit down on top of here and to get it off so that I could cut the opening for this, I used the can opener around this edge to cut that. If I was going to keep this and use it, I would probably solder that with plumber's solder, but it works pretty well now. I put it out in the driveway, which is that left-hand picture. You can see that it burns real clean with no smoke. The principle here is that when you burn stuff in a chamber, you run out of oxygen before you run out of combustible products. So your normal fire ends up shooting a lot of unburned combustible products up the flue, which you see as smoke. So what this stove does, it circulates fresh air into the corona of the flame so that it'll reignite and burn the rest. And it's really incredible how clean and how hot this burns. And I made a little stand for the top of it. This is like Syntab stuff. Just hacksawed these slots in here to make this drop together. Then I hacksawed some little notches in here to make it sit firmly on top of the can. It still kind of rocks, not in a good way. But yeah, I was able to heat a cup of water to boiling in less than 10 minutes. And so I poured it into a cup, put a tea bag in it, and while I drank my tin can stove tea, I thought about it and did some internet research, and I knew this wasn't going to be big enough for 2 people. And so I looked at, what do you have to get to make a bigger one? We don't drink coffee, so we didn't have a coffee can or paint cans. And looking online, it was going to take longer and cost more money. I could just go buy a nicely made stove for $20. So we had to spend our time, getting our trailer and getting all our camping stuff together. So I didn't have a whole lot of time to work on dinking around with this. So we bought the stove and it worked great. And so that's what we'll be using. And maybe if I ever need anything bigger than that, I'll make something out of paint cans. The one thing about it is that wood smoke, even if you do burn it cleanly by reburning it, you still get a lot of soot on your pots. And we had this brand new $120 cook set that we got from the REI garage sale for $30, and had a beautiful blue enamel paint job that's now solid black. We're okay with that. Any questions on that?
How long did the commercial gasifier stove take to boil a couple cups of water?
I didn't do any time on that, but it was quick. we made spaghetti in that, and then we were really stingy with the heat and the water. We didn't just dump out the water. Let's see. Yeah, we boiled the noodles and then we left the water in to steam the vegetables. It was no problem at all. We were able to burn this fire with just twigs. You know, most campgrounds that you go to, you're not allowed to, I think state campgrounds, you're not allowed to collect firewood, but nobody's gonna bother you for picking up twigs. And it just took 2 handfuls of twigs to make this big spaghetti dinner for 2 people with leftovers. It's an incredibly powerful stove, and then you don't have to carry fuel. What I did for Tinder, I had made a last month. Did I talk about the clamp board that I made? Anyway, I used a Forstner bit for that, and I saved all of the shavings from the Forstner holes, and this is what I used for Tinder to start the fire. So that was the only fuel we had to carry. You can put wood stove pellets in this thing, but then that's something extra you have to carry. And I think it's really cool to be able to just pick up twigs off the ground and cook your meal from that. I don't know why this isn't in. I've been on I was on a mission trip to Guatemala, and we were building stoves for them there. A much more efficient stove than they're used to, but this would still be a lot more efficient than even that was. I'm not sure why this isn't more common in third world places. Yeah, but it works. I much prefer this to when I was on the camping trip with my friends, they were all using jet boils and some other stuff with propane or alcohol. And I just really don't like having that stuff long and the risk of it leaking or blowing up.
All right, Mr. Nick, is that it?
That's all I got, except for pictures of our summer vacation. 4 days in beautiful scenic Sauk City and Devil's Lake. Next month I may have something about a trailer. We borrowed a friend's nice $300 touring trailer for this trip, and it was fantastic. But I think I could make something cheaper that would work as well. So I might be doing that before next month. We're going camping again this weekend on Labor Day, but we'll be borrowing that trailer again. We did upgrade our tent and sleeping bag though, because our stuff would barely fit in this bag. And when we had to buy groceries at Devil's Lake, you can't. The camp store is only selling ice and firewood. You can't buy anything in camp. There's no place to go out to eat without driving 5 miles. So we carried 20 pounds of groceries from the Piggly Wiggly in Sauk City up the bluff to get into Devil's Lake in 90-degree temperatures. And she's still talking to me.
All right. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
Jansen, do you want to go?
Sure.
Hey, neighbor. If I yelled loud enough, it'd probably show up in Jensen's microphone.
Yeah, I have to have the window open. Let's see if I can find.
You're supposed to be the young expert. Don't disappoint here.
Yeah, I'm just going to be switching between windows, so I'm trying to figure out how to make that work effectively.
You can share a desktop, and then it'll show whatever's on your desktop, like whatever's on top, basically.
Is that the share screen?
Up at the very, as the bottom center, the green button. And then it'll pop up a little thing. Is it working or not?
I'm not seeing one that's saying desktop.
Oh, okay.
It'll share everything, which is fine. as long as you don't have
It's like in a corner. It'll look like the other windows, but it just says desktop. I forget which one it is. If not, you could always just share a window and then drop it and share another window. We'll scream at you when it's not sharing whatever you think you're sharing. All right, we can see a lot of designs.
Okay, so I got the first thing. So a couple of years ago, I found plans on, I think it was a French website for a school project that someone did for making a paraglider. So they took plans they got from somewhere else and modified them to being a single skin paraglider, and then put that out on the internet. So this is kind of like the go-to set of plans that people have had for cobbling together a paraglider out of less than ideal materials. So the standard material that you're supposed to use is ripstop nylon, but that's relatively expensive. And there was another website that I found where someone else was using construction plastic. So I decided that I was going to try it with tarp and duct tape. So after determining that that was the cheapest way possible to approximate this, I set to downloading the plans and converting them into a format that would be able to be printed off. So this is the original DXF that I downloaded, which is enormous and not very convenient for printing. I just need like the 3 tiles kind of in the middle of the screen, and really I need like the individual sections from that. So I couldn't find a good way to do this, so I ended up using the measure function to remodel every single part, which was a little bit tedious, but I ended up with a model of all the different parts, and then started printing that off on an 8.5 by 11 printer, and laying those out in the living room floor and taping them together and cutting them out. So this was basically the first summer of working on this. Just printing off a ream of paper to get a full half set of plans that could be mirrored over around all the size parts that I needed. So 2 summers ago, doing all the raster stuff, cutting it out, and getting a full set of parts made out of tarp. So here, this kind of gives you an idea of how long each of these pieces are. That's about 3 meters. So I have room for like the shortest part of the paraglider down the middle of the living room, and the rest of it would extend quite far out to either side. So it's a pretty tedious process of laying everything out, but I have enough room to maybe do 1 or 2 of these side by side and cutting out all the different parts. So this is the transferring process of the printed paper, transferring it to tarp sections. And on the left there, you got the stack of plans, and then an enormous tarp laid out on the other side that's slowly being cut up into sections. This is the pile of plans in our basement that flooded a little bit. So they're sitting on top of a piece of foam there that kept them from getting wet. But this is just kind of to give you an idea of, it required about a ream of paper to do the printed plans for that. If I was going to do it again, I'd probably go to a print shop and have the plans much faster, because I don't think it wasn't really worth it to do everything by hand for that. So after I had all the tarp sections, I decided that I should probably do some structural testing to figure out whether or not tarp was actually a good material to do this with. And as you can see from my highly scientific setup, it's fairly sturdy. One thing that I learned from this process was tarp has several separate layers. There's kind of like 2 plasticky bits on the outside, that's where the color is, and then there's these grayish fibers in between. And the outside is barely attached to those. So if you move it back, and if you grab either side and move it up and down a bit, you'll quickly delaminate every single layer and be left with like a bunch of shreds and bluish plastic bits. So I had to figure out, now that all of my parts were already cut out of this material, how do I make it work despite that? So what I came up with was, in taping it together, you've got, most of the joints are 3 sections of tarp coming together. So I had to kind of make a sandwich where each individual piece of tarp is layered between 2 pieces of duct tape, and then all 3 pieces of duct tape come together in the middle, only touching the duct tape. So that way it's only tensile forced rather than pulling apart the sandwich. This is kind of a mid-process picture where I have a lot of the different sections put together. Another major structural aspect of this is mason line running along pretty much all of the edges of the parts. So the tarp isn't necessarily all that sturdy, and I didn't do all that great of testing, but I knew the mason line was pretty sturdy. So if any part of it failed, it would more be, oh, there's a hole in it, as opposed to the entire thing fell apart. So there were some fairly sturdy sections holding it together that made me think it would last long enough to at least inflate it and see what it was like.
Sorry,
So,
what is a mason line?
It's a type of string that they use in masonry where you have like some posts in the ground and then you run the line between it and get it really taut to try and like make your bricks lined up correctly. It's just a type of string that's sold at hardware stores that's relatively sturdy for how light it is. Like a nylon, I think, line. It's about a 1/16 of an inch wide. I'd use it for a lot of
tarps have that for strength.
Yeah, it's sturdy and it's cheap.
He added it in to add strength. Yeah. So the tarp was just a tarp, and so you put in mason line to take the tension.
Oh, yeah. I see. Thanks.
Yeah, so there's on the tarp sections, so like along the ribs, the part where there's the duct tape on the edges there's mason line embedded in that. And it's running along the back sections and the front section. So the entire thing is kind of a net of mason line with tarp filling in the places in between there. So the loads get taken, the air loads get taken by the tarp, and then that's transferred to the lines, which is then transferred to the other lines that hold it all together. So basically, mason line was cheaper than paracord or the proper sorts of lines that they actually use on parachutes, so to fit with the theme of making the cheapest possible aircraft. So after many hours of taping all that together, I took it out to a field. This is right outside our house. And got one of my brothers to hold the other end of it. And I was like, wow, this is enormous and seems to be catching enough wind that it might actually work. So this was also the first time that we took it out of the living room. So it was like going from, okay, it's like kind of long and it's just a big pile on the floor, to seeing how big 270 square feet actually is for a giant tarp thing. And then all those are lines that have to be connected to the other lines to hold the whole thing up. So this is just kind of initial getting an idea of what it looked like. The next process was putting together the sets of lines that connect the harness to the wing. So this was my setup in the kitchen with the roll of mason line down there and a tape measure laid across the floor to measure out all the different sections and label them and line them up. So I got sets of risers there, string running all over the floor, and I didn't really know if I got the measurements on these correct and was planning to have to adjust them. So all of the connections where there's more than 2 lines going together are done with loops where it starts with 1 loop and then 2 loops are added into that. So if any individual line needed to be lengthened, I could take a scissors and cut it open and then just add another line without having to redo an entire section. So there's the loops, and then kind of up near the top there, you can see the first set of multiple loops going into the bottom part. So that's starting to get more of the lines together. And then this is either partway through the process or where I've gotten most of the lines attached. And then this is taking it out to the park to untangle all the lines, because initially it was just kind of in a pile on the floor. So there's 2 sets of lines basically for each half of the wing, and then 2 other sets that only go to the rear part of the wing, which are supposed to be able to be used for steering. They function kind of like flaps on an airplane, where the back like foot or so of the wing will drop down when you pull on it. So you can't lift it up at all. You can either increase drag on the left side or the right side or both sides, and that's what your method of steering it is. And it's fairly compact. So I was able to fit the entire wing into about the volume of a garbage bag. And then this is my rock climbing harness attached to a piece of PVC pipe, because I don't really have the proper harness for doing this correctly. So took a lot of duct tape and entirely too long, but it's about ready to test things. Next, I'll pull up the video of the noteworthy parts of testing it.
Just worth noting, you know, I think all the major space program steps, they put animals in service as a test dummies, just pointing that out. I don't know if you thought
Humans
about it.
are animals too.
Yeah, college students.
That is true. Nick's got a point. You get the college student that probably checks some boxes. So
When I used to hang glide, and one kid told me that his parents were hang glider designers, and they'd use him when he was a little kid as a flight test dummy.
Did you see that video of the 3-year-old and the kite?
No. Do I want to?
She's fine. She didn't get hurt, but she got pulled up by a kite. It was terrifying.
Oh boy.
yeah, it's like the tail of the kite wrapped up the kid and lofted him like 100 or 150 feet in the air.
Oh, yeah. That's the sort of thing every parent has nightmares about.
Do you see the screen with the video on it currently?
Yep.
Okay. So this is the initial inflation test where we got to properly inflate a little bit. So this is the next step where we attach a person and have 3 other people pull them across the field. By this point, the steering lines had gotten tangled too much and they weren't really effective. So it was just kind of aim it into the wind, run across the field, see if it works at all. And that's the extent of how flying went.
Was that your brother?
Yes, those are, that was my 2 brothers and one of my friends from college.
I think it might be best if it stops there.
Yeah, that's kind of why I didn't do any further testing.
And
so it is probably the cheapest possible way to make a paraglider. I'm not sure I would recommend anyone try and replicate it though.
Has anybody else made one of these out of tarp, or are you the first psycho
There was someone that made it out of construction plastic and kind of welded it together with like a soldering iron type thing, and theirs actually flew. But they had some experience doing paragliding stuff correctly before also.
Yeah. Single surface paragliders are a little dicey at best. They can deflate easily, and
yeah.
But in the early days of hang gliding, that was how people experimented too. They'd get bamboo poles from carpet rolls and visqueen and duct tape and put something together and run down a hill, just never higher than you wanted to fall. I still have my I still have an old hang gliding harness here. If you got some bamboo and plastic.
We just need a big enough hill to jump off of, right?
Yeah, that was the problem. When I started flying, I was going to school in Minnesota, and we just had tiny little hills there. Things really got a lot better when I moved to Seattle.
I mean, your other option right, is to get a boat and get towed behind a boat, right? Because then if
Yeah.
you're over water, you're not gonna.
Then
that whole.
just gotta
that
not
prove
get
out?
tangled up in your whole kite thing and drown or something.
That's definitely a problem.
I think the biggest issue is the entire thing was larger by a couple of percent because I screwed up where the seams were, and in addition to the duct tape, it ended up making everything a little bit bigger, and then I didn't know how to adjust the lines properly. So, and then I had to shorten the A risers because I couldn't get it to inflate normally. And you're supposed to just pull on those to get it to inflate and then let them back out again. Whereas I shortened them permanently and then it collapsed immediately after I got it to inflate.
Yeah.
So between the compromised structure and not really knowing what I was doing, had a hard time getting much flight out of it. And based on how much effort it took, it would have made more sense to buy an actual paraglider instead of spending all that time working on it. And
well, don't we have somebody
training properly?
to know something about those?
There's a paragliding place somewhere kind of near Madison. I haven't looked into it a whole lot yet, though. Because
Nick, I wouldn't say Jim's knowledgeable. He's definitely opinionated.
I actually used to design parachutes, but they were just munitions parachutes, not for people.
Yeah.
It was a student job in college.
Jim, have you ever had a paraglider?
I still have a paraglider.
And?
It's in the shed, Jansen. You can have it for free.
Really?
I'll
definitely take you up on that offer.
It comes with a moral story. So UW used to have a paragliding club, and I joined it when I wanted to paraglide. And paragliding, by the way, in the Midwest is a horrible idea. There's really no good launch sites. There's no good options. If you're gonna be serious about it, you either have to move out west or near a mountain, or the other option that's really great nowadays is the motor gliders.
There's a couple open source electric projects for.
I would say something like that is around here is really the only practical way to get up. I did some classes out in New Mexico with a guy, a really good instructor, and then I realized in the Midwest there's just not a practical way to do it. The nearest hang gliding place is in Whitewater, and they actually have some on their site an explanation why they don't paraglide very much, and it's just the conditions are wrong around here. We don't have the surface terrain for lift, and thermaling is pretty dicey with paragliders in the Midwest in terms of how do you get up to it.
Same reason sailplanes are scarce.
So my understanding with paragliders, the powered ones, there's like no regulation at all on those, right? You're limited on some ceiling for altitude, and that's about it.
It's all self, and there's good facilities for training actually in the Midwest as well. They're pricey, and you want to just check out your instructors and make sure they're not knuckleheads before you start training with them. Back in the day, they were really expensive, and it was hard to get the skill to safely paramotor. But I think they've solved most of the issues with beginners going up on paramotors. Not to say there's no risk to it, but from what I've seen, they've got people starting on paramotors in flat terrain areas, and they're not killing people left and right. I mean, it's still extraordinarily dangerous as hobbies go, as is hang gliding. But if you have a good instructor, you can usually manage the risk pretty good.
It's unforgiving. It's only dangerous if you're not careful about it.
There's a lot of things that go that way, I think.
That seems to be a theme. Blind machinists working with batteries that you don't know the vintage of, and self-made things you're hanging in the air from. Who's next?
These are all kind of consistent sector themes where we have enough knowledge to build things, but maybe enough smarts to decide whether to use them, which obviously Jansen's like light years ahead of us. I was waiting for the like.
See, I've had this for a full year since the initial testing, and it's sat in its bag. I was like, well, I guess it's halfway. I don't want to detangle it and try and figure out the steering, but
I was going to say, when I watched the thing nose over and roll, I was just imagining all the lines having to get sorted through. You got enough people, but it's still got to suck. It's no fun. Any other questions for Jansen?
Are you going to do any other flying after this?
I want to try doing paragliding at some point in the future. Basically, my plan was wait until I'm done with college and then look into electric paramotor stuff with like a proper wing, because I can figure out some motors and a battery, and if that dies, I just kind of glide to the ground rather than having this thing break up above me and hope I'm close enough to the ground for it not to matter much.
Have a reserve that somebody else built and packed.
Yeah, that's also an important aspect.
Well, it sounds like Jim can hook you up with a wing if you need one, so that's pretty cool. It's just what Jim needs on his conscience.
Well, no, the story that comes with it is I took it from the hang gliding club because they called the manufacturer up, and this is quite a few years ago, and the manufacturer said, that thing's still out there? That should have been retired a decade ago. So bottom line, it had been sun damaged, and porosity is the key with safety on those. If the material becomes too porous, the aerodynamics just go to hell, and you wind up with a really dangerous wing. And they gave it to me and said, hey, we got some holes in this, we need patched, and I just never gave it back. Because I called the manufacturer, and they're like, no, nobody should be under that. The only saving grace they had, again, is we're in the Midwest, and you never got more than 10 or 15 feet off the ground at Elver Park. And this thing sank out so bad that you couldn't even get that high. So because it couldn't go very high, you probably were unlikely to kill yourself on it. But they had no business putting people under it. So I just, on the manufacturer's advice, I retired it. So if you want to kite it, you can kite all day with it. It's great for that. You can learn most of the skills you need in terms of the important stuff close to the ground with your feet on the ground, and that's the safest way to do it. And then you'll be a real master once you go out to get proper instruction. Because what happens is people go out west and they pay an instructor to teach them, and the first thing they learn is they don't know how to kite the canopy. And so you wind up burning days of instruction just in frustration. The one thing we've got in the Midwest is plenty of wind and flat ground, so kiting is a skill that anyone can practice safely here in the Midwest. And then you'll go out to the proper training site with real hills, and you'll be a leg up on everybody else at the beginning.
Spoken
Sounds
from a
like
true
a
master.
Not even close. No, someday I'll get back into paragliding too. I decided I didn't need another really expensive hobby though. The challenge is, of course, it's if you got to travel to do it, it becomes a part-time hobby. And paragliding is another one of those ones that you shouldn't do part-time. If you're going to begin, you should just get really into it for safety again.
Kind of hard on
what I was
too.
Sorry, what I was saying is there isn't any FAA regulation, is there? You don't have to have a license, a pilot's license.
It's considered an ultralight, so they have the associations kind of hopefully teach people, but no, it's basically just you don't weigh enough to destroy anything too much, and if you die, it's your problem.
Yeah, I had looked at ultralights and paragliders a long time ago, and I was astounded to find out that there was nothing at all
It's kind of frustrating compared to the drone regulations, because you have to register everything, and then someone can go up in an ultralight and not have any problems.
But yeah, you can have hundreds of pounds ultralight and go cruise around with impunity, and yet you have more than a 4-pound RC helicopter, and all of a sudden it's a major federal disaster. So anyway,
it's like anything else, though. It's just numbers, right? So if there's a small number of people participating and they manage themselves fairly well, the FAA doesn't want anything to do with it. As soon as you have millions of drones out there and anyone can get it for Christmas, they had to do something about it, right? Once the numbers took off. Because model aircraft were flying dangerous drones with much worse control systems for decades before drones came along, right? It wasn't that the model aircraft were the problem, it was the numbers. And once you have the numbers, you have multiple idiots doing stupid things, and then you get regulation. If paragliding ever took off, you'd have the exact same situation, which is as soon as people start landing on the state capital or the nation's capital grounds, you will quickly have regulation.
All right, I got the last presentation, I think, so I'll go through this real quick. I got asked to make a paper press. Somebody had reached out and said that they looking to have a paper press made, so put that together. Where is my present. Where'd it go? There we go. So I looked into paper presses to find out what all is out there. So there's it turns out there's a ton of people who are using paper presses. Paper presses are used to manufacture your own, turn your own paper fiber into paper. So you take either existing paper and grind it all up in a blender, or otherwise manufacture your fibers that you want to use. And the idea behind the press is you're pressing the water out and making it a consistent thickness. So you're trying to smash out the water, but also bind the fibers together so that they don't untangle. If you over smash them, you crush them, which is just as bad apparently. And in fact, I know very little about paper smashing besides what I'm about to share. So apparently an affordable paper making press is like $300. And then we go into the fancy affordable paper making press for only $700. And then you can get even more affordable paper making press for $2,000 for what's essentially a Harbor Freight A-frame press, only a really, really tiny version of it. So the bar was set relatively low in terms of cost to performance. And so I felt like I would be in a reasonable position to be able to make something useful for this person that didn't cost a ton. So I looked around. There's certainly plenty of people with DIY versions or versions of things that people have rolled their own on. This one on the left is it's interesting construction, and I don't think I don't know, Sean, the carpenter here, would know what your allowable span is on a 2x4, but I don't think you can span 20 tons, like a foot on each side of the 2x4, even all of them gang together like that. But I could be totally wrong. This one to the right was a lot more inspiring in that somebody took C-channel, welded up some aluminum, and were able to put something together that worked.
I don't think you're just presenting a different screen than you think you're presenting. We're just seeing the paper press with your name under it.
Oh, you guys are no fun.
Your title.
How many? I'm 6 slides in here, and now somebody wants to tell me. Jesus Christ, you guys are terrible.
You stop talking sooner.
Oh man. Hang on a second, we're getting there. Let's just do this. Advanced. I just want my whole screen. They did take away desktop. Can't even do that. There we go. Let's do screen 1. Can everyone see paper press?
Yeah, that looks
And now the real question, can you see the next slide?
Yep.
Yes, we're good now. We have our affordable paper press.
Good.
You guys are killing me. You're going over in the second screen so I can't see you anymore. All right. Well, here you go. Here's your cheap ass $300 paper making press. Bunch of plywood stacked together with some threaded rods with a crank. This is a vice handle set that they usually sell for woodworking. So you end up with one of those things to be able to smash some paper. Then you can go up to the more advanced $700 version of a paper smasher with a little small carb bottle jack in it. But again, with just some threaded rods and some. It's funny because all the people making these wood ones talk about how strong the wood is. I know Sean's rolling his eyes already, but the wood is not super rigid. And then this was the third version that was certainly extremely expensive relative to what you're getting. It's at least got some nice, reasonable thickness kind of steel structure built into it, but for $2,000, you're paying a lot for a proprietary thing that somebody's making just to make a paper press rather than a more generic system. So these were 2 of the DIY versions that I found that sort of provided a little bit of guidance in terms of a reasonable direction to head in, which is getting an arbor press, which I'll show you in a few minutes, from Harbor Freight, of course, as I am not scared of Harbor Freight objects with moving parts, and which we'll learn why maybe that's not a great strategy. And what I was saying earlier is the 2x4s here, they're using these 2x4s for like a 20-inch span end to end. And so they got a 20-ton bottle jack in the center, and then they're trying to squish out 20 tons out a foot on a 2x4 on edge, which I don't think is anywhere near the amount of material that needs to be in the way to span out that far. So this one on the right is what I kind of looked at and thought was pretty reasonable, especially given the material that we've got around here. And so I ended up kind of going off in a direction using this one on the right as sort of a good design methodology. So the goals were to try and use as much off the shelf as I could so that I didn't have to spend a ton of time building it. The person wanted a 22-inch by 22-inch area to be able to squish stuff. I wanted to put in a pressure gauge because I don't think you can get very good consistency pushing all the water out if you're not able to visualize how much pressure you're applying, because the presses have no feedback at all really on pull. And then I wanted to minimize time to build, which we'll find out how that turned out. So yes, Nick, Harbor Freight, moving parts, this is all good. So $200 gets you a 20-ton bottle jack with a frame, with some press plates and some other parts. And then you can throw in 20% off. Had some time today, decided to throw in some animated transitions here. It's going to be very entertaining for everybody. If anybody wants to see that again, oh, it didn't work. There we go. See, nice stuff there. So the idea then was to try and break this down into simple steps. So you get the press put together, build these load spreaders to spread out our 22-inch by 22-inch platen, add a pressure gauge in, and then call it a day. So assemble the press, quick and easy. Put that thing together. This is a very different design than the press that we have, which we bought like 10 years ago. Harbor Freight's either gotten sued, has figured out a better construction strategy, or something else. Ours is all welded frame, and I'm guessing they dropped the welded frame because the box size is way smaller for this, because they're able to just bolt all the parts together on the consumer end. And then obviously they don't have to have a skilled welder welding all the parts together. So I used our old building purlin material. These were the walls out of the 56 Corey Street building that we tore down. So these are still sitting out back. So I brought some of those in. They're in surprisingly good shape for as much water as they were exposed to in the building and now having sat outside of the building. So I used the iron worker to notch out these chunks so that the beams would fit together. And this is the idea here then, is to allow the regular press sort of smasher that's in the middle of it to fit down in between this bar so that we could maintain that functionality if it wanted to turn back into a regular press at some point. So the hardest thing about making this is we need something really, really flat, because we don't want to make our platen out of flat. And in welding it, we're going to put in a ton of thermal stress, which is going to twist all of our steel framing. And then our part's going to be all pretzeled, and I could sit for hours and shim it to make it flat again. But it's a lot easier if we just weld it and hold it flat as we go. So I went upstairs and grabbed, this is like a 20-inch by probably 24-inch granite block. So it's like a 4-inch thick slab of granite with a bunch of insert nuts glued in. And these are used as, it's usually called optical breadboard, is oftentimes what it's called, where you've got a granite slab for stability, and then you've got a ton of these insert nuts placed into it to keep things extremely flat, but give you bolting surfaces. So I reused the bolting surfaces to clamp down a bunch of wood to hold my platen flat. Was able to weld it all up, working inside and between all those clamps to get everything put into place. And it stayed really, really flat. My only other flat surface I can check against is our concrete floor, and it seems well flat as far as the paper is going to be concerned, so that's good. So the next thing is to figure out the bottle jack. I found this GIF online on a guy who makes bottle jacks website, and he obviously spent some time in the 90s putting this GIF together. I thought it was worthwhile to see. But essentially, this is your bottle jack reservoir and your piston, and so this is the little pump that you're pumping, and then you've got a release valve over here. And so these two check valves allow the fluid to flow into the piston and push it up every time you lift and stroke this pump up and down. And so it's going to bypass a second check valve, get pushed into the piston area, and then that other check valve closes backwards. And then your pump stroke goes up, sucks in more fluid, and then pumps it back out again. And so you can do this repetitively to lift the center piston up. And then if you release this bleed screw down here, it'll bypass all the check valves and this pump and run it back into the reservoir. The catch with the bottle jacks is you need a return spring. So this doesn't return naturally. You have to push it back. So you'll see there's two big springs in the top of the press, and that's their job, is to return the bottle. So the thing is, I wanted to add a pressure gauge, and somebody had this really helpful schematic online. So you get your bottle jack, and then you drill a hole in it, and then you'll get pressure out of it. So fortunately, this wasn't the only set of instructions that were online. Somebody had a little bit more detailed design. And so the first step is to get a gigantic wrench. We need a 75mm wrench. So I used the plasma cutter to cut out a 75mm hex out of a chunk of scrap metal, and then promptly bent this rod trying to open the top of the jack. I ended up using a hammer closer to the handle, and I was able to knock it open. So this was some pictures from somebody else doing the same kind of thing. This middle pipe is really hard to remove, and if you remove it, you've got to close it in hard enough to reseal it. So I did the same kind of thing. I just skipped removing it. So I cross drilled down through. And so the idea here is you're drilling down through this cast iron base to get underneath this piston area. And then you come in from the top and drill down until you hit your cross drill hole. And that now gives you a port on the outside that is the same pressure as what's in the middle of the cylinder. And so I did that, put our platens on, and I'm done. We're good to go. This is what we needed to do. So as with everything then, I started by, oh, I got one more. Oh yeah. Started with getting that figured out and then playing around with testing it. So the first problem in testing it is I pumped up the jack and the jack would not hold pressure. So previously, if you were using this bottle jack, you just pump it up and push your bearing off or whatever you're doing, you wouldn't really care. But in our use case, we needed to hold pressure for like 20 minutes. And in order to do that, it means we needed no leakage. So it turns out they put a single O-ring. This is the little pump that we've got that's on the side of the jack that you're pumping up and down with the handle. And in looking at it closely, I saw this scratch. There's a scratch in the bore of this pump. And so sure enough, we're bypassing air and pushing air into the cylinder, which then means you've got a cylinder full of air and liquid, and the air is compressible, and so you cannot hold pressure. And I believe the reason for this problem was that the single O-ring was scratching on the edge of the cylinder area inside of there. So what I ended up doing then is getting a second bottle jack. So you can buy a new jack for 40 bucks. I swapped the pumps over, figuring that my other jack's already drilled, should be fine. And it still didn't fix the problem. It still would relieve pressure. And it seemed like this jack has a pressure relief on it so that you can't overpressure the cylinder and basically blow up the cylinder. And it seems like the pressure relief set at like 2,000 PSI, which is, it's supposed to be 20,000 PSI. So it's way too low. The good thing is the new jack had a dual O-ring pump. So clearly there's totally different manufacturers building these things. The annoyance meaning though, that I needed to restart the whole process with a new jack. Only it's 78 millimeter instead of 75 millimeter. So the first step is make a new wrench and start over. So then I got the new jack working and it worked great. And then it kind of bled down, kind of like the first one did. So I was trying to figure out what the hell was going on with it. And it turns out if you're just crushing the steel, it acts the same way as a shitty bottle jack does. So I would pump up the jack, and then at some point it would start relieving pressure. And it turned out that was the crush strength of the steel. So the steel was just giving away. It had nothing to do with the jack hydraulics, which is what I was trying to debug. It had everything to do with the steel plate being point loaded in an area it shouldn't have been point loaded. And so that kind of died. So then I made a new crossbar out of much, much, much thicker stock. And now it's finally able to hold pressure. So if you zoom in on here, this is at about 7,500 PSI inside of the bottle. And we're able to squish things properly like we're supposed to. So I need to throw in wood, so there'll be wood platens on the top and the bottom. I'm not going to install those. I'm going to leave it to the person who's going to own this thing to put those on in case that there's some particular thing to paper making that needs to be, they need to be mindful of. Then I do need to put a drip pan on the bottom. So I'm just going to do a 3-sided pan with a drain out the front, because as you're pressing the water, you're pushing all the water, or as you're pressing the paper, you're pushing all the water out of it. So yeah, long story short, that is the paper smasher bottle jack system. I now know way more about bottle jacks than I ever wanted to know about. So if anybody's got any bottle jack quiz questions, fire away.
There was that slide that said collect massive profits. Did that happen? Did that work?
Well, the goal of this project was to pay the utility bill for a month, and we will succeed in doing that. So it helps that we had all Harbor Freight gift cards, so we could buy all the Harbor Freight parts with the gift card, as well as the Menards parts. So we aren't out any cash, which is good. So that helps. Just hours of time. Although I think it's mostly been to Jim's entertainment, so it's been good.
Is this just a one-time thing, or is this something the guy is going to want more?
Well, I'm hoping Jim's going to take up, Jim's kind of the profit arm of everything here. So I'm hoping Jim's going to take up the stead and just start manufacturing these things, given that you can sell them for $2,000. I think shipping might be a bit of a challenge, but no, this is totally a one-time thing. I occasionally I'll build stuff like this and somebody else will want one, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be a one-time gig. Any other questions from anybody?
Well, I couldn't help but notice the flattest part of your whole assembly was involving 2x4s, keep everything clamped down tight. And, I just wonder.
Sean, that's just weld stress there, bud. Just weld stress. Wasn't actually holding anything down. It's just clamping it down to the granite. So the granite's doing all the work as long as we just let the 2x4 kind of do a little compression there. No big deal.
Well, so what PSI were you at when you crushed the stock tube on the Harbor Freight Press?
Probably it's probably like 8 or 10,000 pounds.
So like not even half the strength of what it's rated for?
Quarter of the strength, yeah. But keep in mind, it's supposed to be point loaded on a solid piece of steel underneath the bottle jack. And I was point loading on a tube that was never supposed to be loaded. I was hoping that the tube had plenty of structure, but it did not. If I wanted to prevent that in the future, what I should have done is drilled holes through it and then welded in tubes or welded in solid steel. But that wouldn't have worked anyways because the tube itself wasn't really a good enough load spreader to spread that load out to the edges.
So just curious, the tube was intended basically to keep the jack in line at the bottom?
Centered.
So it
That's
can't
right.
kick out.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was never designed as to be loaded like that?
No, it was not designed to do what I did with it. I was hoping to abuse it and get away with it, and it didn't work.
So probably if you did the math, Harbor Freight used exactly the right diameter tubing for the function it was supposed to be done.
I am certain the side loading would not supposed to exceed that, especially by the manual, which says, if the thing is even touching, you're not supposed to use it at all. So I think that's their ultimate disclaimer, because that whole piston floats. It sits and floats in the bottom, and that tube that I crushed is supposed to keep it centered. No. Eric, are you trying to ask something or not? Or are you just talking to talk?
It's like to talk to myself. So do you, I guess, money-wise, a correct one of these would be what, $5,000, and this, so that's why this would be worth $2,000 to someone else, or?
Yeah, I'm not charging anywhere near that, but yes, I think that little paper press that we saw online for $2,000, that little aardvark guy, that is it's like 8 tons less and way smaller. So this is making a 22-inch by 22-inch sheet of paper, which is really big.
It's really huge.
And the material that's built out of is much thicker than anything else that I've seen anybody use. So hopefully it's a lot stronger than it needs to be. But the interesting thing, as with most things around here, is I have never made paper, so I haven't got a clue what the real constraints are. So I spent more time emailing back and forth to make sure I fully understood what they needed than anything else. I'm thinking this is going to be vastly overbuilt, but I might be surprised. Fortunately, you just add more layers of plywood. So I've got 2 layers of 3/4 inch plywood that go on top and bottom. And if it's doing any deflection or deformation, we just add more wood.
It still seems huge to me. I can't imagine that someone would really go buy something that big because it'd be so cost prohibitive.
Yeah, I can't. I think what they're targeting is like home users who are really getting into this, but not that into it, and are willing to drop $2,000 on a thing that seems like it's super useful. And it's in the hydraulic press land, these are all little tiny presses. But in the paper making land, these are huge. So it's kind of the crossover that way.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yours is pretty theft proof.
Yeah, good thing steel is way down. It's worth like 3 cents probably. I'm waiting for Jim to come up with a routed polycarb model with the ribs like every 3 inches, and
there you go.
Maybe we can use Jansen's parachute design.
One thing I've always been curious about with those pump bottle jacks is if you pull that bleeder screw out a little too far, it always spits out a little oil. And I know you can only get so many spits before you run your reservoir dry, but is there an O-ring on that screw thread that's supposed to keep that in place that wears out? Or?
Yeah, there's actually a big like tube bushing that goes in there. You can buy rebuild kits for any of the bottle jacks. They're all pretty much the same. But yeah, and having taken 2 of them apart, there's a big cylinder of rubber in there that you're sealing on.
Okay.
And then that screw you're unscrewing is just like a pin down the center. And so by loosening it up a little bit, you're just allowing it to bleed by into the system. So I've never seen any of them spit, so you must have some really worn ones. Yeah. But yeah, you can get cylinder rebuild kits, and it comes with all seals and everything else. Really, besides needing that massive wrench to pull the top off, the rest of it's all disassembled by hand. There's really nothing special to it. I was fairly surprised, but they're as cheap as you can come up with. And that was the guy who had the little bottle jack animation. He had shared, he had gotten some unsolicited spam from a company that manufactured them in China. And the 20-ton jack from China, picked up in China, is like $6. So the fact that you can buy a bottle, the guy's argument is like, if you're buying a bottle jack for $6 that lifts 20 tons, you shouldn't be expecting anything at all. So, and the first jack, like I said, you know, if that jack was on our press and we used it, it would probably work perfect. The only reason that I even am suspicious that it has anything wrong with it is because I put a gauge on it. Without a gauge, the thing would appear as though it's got plenty of power to pump stuff off and whatever else. It's just, it will not hold any pressure at all over time. And these jacks aren't designed to hold pressure. So the fact that they do hold pressure is like a mistake more than anything. They should basically just pump up, and then if you want to hold a load up, you have to put cribbing or something underneath it. It's not meant to hold anything. So I've got the one sitting behind me. It's been sitting for 24 hours and it still has 3,500 PSI in it, starting at 4,000 PSI. So it's got plenty of staying for squishing. You're supposed to hold pressure on paper for like 15 minutes. So I think it'll be more than.
Shouldn't it be the check valves that are holding the pressure rather than the O-ring in the piston there?
The check valve should be holding the pressure. The O-ring, so the problem is you can leak by the primary piston seal. And so you can leak oil by the piston. You can leak oil by the little bleed screw that Sean's talking about. There's 2 different check valves, and there's an oil flap on the bottom of the piston. So there's like a ton of leak surfaces. And then that big thread in the middle, you can leak oil around the thread gantry all the way back up. So there's a lot of reasons that the fluid can make its way back out of the piston and the way that it's built. Integrating the pump with the bottle jack, or the pump with the jack, gives you some leakage options. The other fun one I've seen is they have a big screw down the middle of the piston itself, and some of them end up having porosity in the screw or in the piston, and it leaks oil into the screw and leaks oil out the top slowly. So I mean, they're made as cheap as they can be. The story I can give you of that is we had Briggs & Stratton was an engine research client that we had at the university. And we had an engine, and we had tons of really sophisticated instrumentation and stuff built into this thing. And we were running it, and it just had terrible emissions. So you just could not fix the emissions on it or anything. So the guy finally tore down the engine, whose lab it was, and there was a hole in the side of the cylinder wall. Like the cylinder that's going up and down, up and down, up and down, has a huge hole in the side. And it runs just fine, and it works just fine. But that liner traps a ton of gas every cycle. So as soon as you go out to exhaust, you dump all this unburned fuel out. When the piston stroked down, stroked up, trapped fuel, burned, and then on its way down, it released the fuel again and then pushes it out the exhaust. And we talked to Briggs & Stratton about it, and they were like, oh yeah, I mean, we look at them, but we don't like inspect them. If it runs, it runs. That's good. We sell them. So the whole engine for Briggs & Stratton is like $4. So we were trying to build a fuel injection system for them because lawnmowers are under the same EPA guidelines, or becoming under the same EPA guidelines that everything else is. And in order to meet those guidelines, you had to go to fuel injection, and the fuel injection system is like $15. So the entire engine is 3 times cheaper than the fuel injection system to do emissions controls. So that's why when you're out driving your lawnmower around, the thing smells terrible because there's basically no emissions on it at all. So fun things you never wanted to know. So gas lawnmowers all the way. Lawnmowers and weed whackers are massive emitters of unburned fuel and unburned oil if you got a 2-stroke. So they're not good for you.
California started regulating them about 20 years ago, and you could buy those engines, and they started making 4-stroke engines for lawn appliances like weed whackers.
Yeah, and that was in order to meet those emissions, everything went over to 4-stroke, because prior to that, everything was 2-stroke.
Yeah.
2-strokes are way better for efficiency, but you can't, the controls of emissions are really hard.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you just need to buy that electric lawnmower.
Exactly.
Yep.
There you go. We come full circle.
That's that's the right way to go, is just make everything electric.
Anybody got anything else they wanted to share? All right. That's it for fun and entertainment. I hope everybody's doing well, staying alive, staying sane, all those kind of fun things.
Yeah.
Lots of good stuff.
We're in September now. It's the slide into winter. It's going to be very exciting, extremely exciting.
Any news or hopeful signs about the shop opening up in the next year?
Well, the wood shop will remain in reservation use into the future, and I may have some time here in fall to put a big wall in to be able to get the car bay and the welding shop tied into the welding shop exhaust in sort of the same way that the wood shop is tied in. But I haven't looked in the last 2 days at Dane County, but I don't think we're really having changed a whole hell of a lot. The university was trending upward strongly in the last 3 days, 4 days. And then today they did a lot lower result. But they just finished move-in yesterday. And so I think, in my time in school, when you were moving in, people were not out partying every night, but now it's the partying every night before school really kicks in kind of thing. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with UW. So, yeah.
So the wager is still open?
What's that?
The betting is still on?
I think the betting pool is still open. If anybody wants to get their bets in, feel free.
We're past the very first date somebody had on there, but it is actually still the closest date. So if you're going by closest, we have to leave that one on there.
Well, yeah, I'm hopeful. I hope there's some magic that UW's got that they're going to figure out how to keep the students contained and keep them from getting sick. But I just can't imagine how that job works. It seems like a losing battle.
It's all about college students using protection, right?
we know they're really good at that.
We know how good they are.
This is Mark. I think everyone's seen it, but they are starting a trial. I think trying to get 3,000 people at the university for a Zenkas. Is that what it's called? So there was a new script was in town yesterday, and they are starting a trial out of UW. So I don't know what it takes to get in that, but
not much actually, Mark.
Guinea pig, Chris, you could open.
I went to the website yesterday, and they sent me the invite today.
Oh wow!
Oh, so I think they're rolling it out 800 a week, or until they get to, I think, to 8,000. So there's a lot of opportunities. So yeah, you go to the website, you fill out very little information, and can't have had COVID basically. And I think that's probably the only thing. And then they will get a hold of you within a day and let you know you're in.
Wow.
So Mark had shared a New York Times article, and I was trying to get a person to talk tonight who has made their own vaccine. And there are a number of biology folks who are making their own vaccines and are able to pass the antibody screening tests, as in they appear as though they've been sick even though they haven't been sick because their own vaccine is working. The catch is there's a whole lot of murky ethical and other things, but self-experimentation has been a part of medicine for forever. It's just that the tools are well within reach for people to be playing with these things now. So for better or for worse, following on close on the coattails of a lot of really big corporations, there are plenty of very smart bio people, and we have a huge variety of very smart bio people in Madison as well. And yeah, so I was trying to get him to speak, but could not get a hold of him in time. So I bugged him yesterday, so that's not really enough time to pull somebody in.
Was he gonna morph his voice when he spoke?
I don't think he's worried about that. I think it's mainly just yeah, just like sure text it. It's if he's making a vaccine, it's one thing, and I don't think he's going to share anything beyond that. So if you're making a vaccine, there's nothing wrong with that. It's what you choose to do with it. And so I think if you're a professional researcher, you do not disclose what you're doing with your bioexperimentation. You can just share that you're able to make things, and that's all that you really need to put out there. But yeah, if you read a lot of medical history, the first stent, literally a surgeon cut down their own arm down into their vessels, inserted a stent into their heart to prove that it was possible to do without dying. And insanely, if they had touched the side of their heart, they would have put their heart into a spasm and killed themselves just immediately because the stent was where it was. But they were lucky enough that when they put it in, they could confirm it with x-rays and then remove it without dying. And that was the first time it was ever done on a live person who was totally with it and feeling the fact that they're pushing a stent through their blood vessel. So that's just how medicine got started a long time ago. It's not the way that we do it today. It was done very much the way that people end up offing themselves in a variety of fun and creative ways to figure these things out. So
Well, there was a lot of grave robbing too early on.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like anything else. But what's intriguing now is that the tools are becoming very inexpensive and very accessible, either through surplus markets or through kind of DIY construction efforts. So I don't know. It'll happen. It'll be interesting. But if the rest of the U.S. weren't coming along, or the rest of these manufacturers weren't coming along quickly, I think you'd see more people playing around with this kind of stuff. Or hell, I mean, if COVID was that much more deadly, there would be a reasonable motivation to say, well, you know, I got 20% chance of dying, or I take some crazy random science dude down the streets vaccine for $1,000.
Wait, isn't that like exactly what's happening to a lot of people in some sense of the word? They're totally buying some crazy random dude's vaccine.
That's true
Listen,
too.
there are buyers.
Go drink your
There's
bleach. It'll take care of you. Yeah, it cuts both ways, right? You have legitimate science and you have quackery, and people buy into the quackery and do it. And so what's the problem with trying the legitimate science? But if you try the legitimate science, the news and everyone else will totally condemn whatever you're doing. But people drinking bleach, though, I mean, it's just a suggestion. I mean, who would have taken it seriously? Totally unreasonable. I mean, I don't know why anybody would think that was realistic.
So I think the UW study is the Oxford formulation. So if anyone has any reason why I shouldn't participate, please let me know. Now, technically, I think I only have a 66% chance of even getting the vaccine. They're doing a 2/3, 1/3 randomized, so you won't even know if you got it. Interestingly, I don't. So the symptoms are mild every night. So I don't know how they do that with the, the double blind like that, right? So if you get sick, you clearly got it, right? I'm guessing.
Mark, what were you saying?
I was going to say, the key here, I know, with this, because with the Oxford one, they were also talking about challenge trials in England. I saw a couple articles about that. But, Jim, you're going to have to go drinking every night at the bars so you can get exposed once you get the vaccine.
Well, they did want people who had exposure risk. So if you guys list any of them, it's not hard to get into this thing, I'm thinking. If you say you're in manufacturing or meat packing or retail or food, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that I'm guessing bump you up the risk ladder for them to have you. And I don't know. I mean, you would think that all the college students would just be on top of it and go, I'm a college student, and they'd be in a heartbeat. That said, I mean, they got to do the test, right? I mean, and they need people to do the test. And then you go, you hope that the companies aren't the mad scientists in this case, right? Because they're all racing madly ahead to produce this with good reason and good economic reasons, but it doesn't mean they can't screw up, I guess.
For sure.
I just hope that at the tier you're at for the testing that it's not everybody turns into zombies and dies.
I've got science research on my arm. See, nice my skin, nice tan, and no tan, fake skin. So I don't know. May as well. Somebody's got to try it. Figure out what the hell happens. It hasn't fallen off yet, and I haven't got cancer, so I guess those two things are okay.
They should have pranked you and actually put a design in there that you wouldn't have realized until you were in the sun for a while.
There you go.
You know, honestly, I don't think they, frankly, in being there and seeing their process, there is I don't think they've got that level of control, Dennis, but I think they wish they did, because it would go a lot better. They harvested a hell of a lot more skin than they deployed, we'll put it that way. I think their loss rate's pretty lossy.
Huh.
All right, on that note, anybody else got anything else? Otherwise, we'll close it out. Thanks, everybody. Hope you had fun. Learned some new things.